Emily Davis was an ordinary woman who suddenly found herself caught in a whirlwind of rumors, judgment, and unrelenting gossip. It all started with the death of her husband, William Davis, a wealthy businessman who had made his fortune through years of hard work. William and Emily had been married for 5 years, and despite the age gap, their love was genuine. But to everyone else, the age difference and Emily's modest background made their relationship seem questionable. She was much younger than him, and their love story didn't quite fit the expectations of society. William had grown up in a wealthy family, one that looked down on people from less privileged backgrounds. His relatives had always treated Emily with a certain coldness, believing that she was with William for his money. After his passing, things only got worse for her. The small suburban town where they lived quickly turned on her, and rumors started flying faster than Emily could keep up. The whispers about her intentions became louder with each passing day. People who had once smiled at her in the grocery store now gave her judgmental looks. She could feel the stares at every corner and the quiet conversations that happened whenever she walked into a room. Emily never imagined that she would be the subject of so much gossip. She was a private person who had always tried to keep a low profile, but now there was no escaping the spotlight. To make matters worse, her husband's family wasn't much better. They didn't hide their opinions about her. They believed Emily had married William for his wealth. They saw her as an outsider, someone who didn't belong in their world. William's family had always been conservative and traditional, and they didn't approve of the fact that Emily came from a middle-class background. They never truly accepted her, and after William's death, their hostility grew even stronger. But Emily knew something the rest of them didn't. Her love for William had been real. She had never cared about his money. In fact, when they first met, Emily was already doing well on her own. She had worked hard to build a career for herself and had no need to rely on anyone. She had always valued independence, so when William entered her life, it wasn't for his wealth. It was because they connected on a level that went beyond material things. The two had met at a business conference of all places. Emily had been there to give a presentation about a project she was working on. William was in the audience that day, and though she hadn't known it at the time, he had been struck by her intelligence and poise. After the event, they began talking and quickly formed a strong connection. They didn't fall in love overnight, but over time, their bond grew deeper. They shared similar values, a love for travel, and an understanding of what it meant to work hard for what you want in life. Emily had never been interested in the idea of marrying for money. She was content in her life and didn't feel the need to tie herself to a man's wealth. So when William proposed, it was not because of his fortune, but because they genuinely loved each other. Their relationship had been built on trust, respect, and a shared vision of the future, but the world didn't see it that way. After William's death, when Emily became the focus of the media's attention, people started calling her a gold digger. The label was hurtful, but she did her best to stay calm. She knew that those who didn't understand her relationship with William would never see things from her perspective. She had to learn how to ignore the hurtful words and move forward. The death of a loved one is already hard enough to process, but to be constantly questioned about your motives on top of it all made things even more painful. Emily didn't want to engage in public battles or defend herself in front of the world. All she wanted was some peace to mourn her husband, but the town's judgment made it impossible to grieve quietly. Every move she made was scrutinized, from the clothes she wore to the way she managed the funeral arrangements. The media made her life a circus, turning a private moment of loss into a public spectacle. William's family didn't help either. They believed that Emily was unfit to manage the estate. They were convinced that she had no right to handle the wealth that William had accumulated over the years. They questioned her abilities, undermining her at every turn. The fact that she was now the sole beneficiary of William's life insurance policy only added fuel to the fire. They made their feelings clear during the funeral, where several of his relatives tried to take control of the arrangements. Emily, trying to stay composed, held her ground. She knew William's wishes, and she knew that he had wanted her to handle things. But it didn't make things easier when the family whispered behind her back. The tension between Emily and Williams Relatives was palpable, and it was clear that they didn't trust her. In the midst of it all, Emily tried her best to focus on what she could control. She made sure the funeral was a reflection of William's life and legacy. She worked closely with the funeral planners, ensuring everything was done according to his wishes. But no matter how much effort she put into honoring him, she couldn't escape the judgment from others. The situation only grew more complicated when the insurance payout became a topic of discussion. William's life insurance policy was worth millions, and Emily was named as the sole beneficiary. The town's gossip reached new heights, with everyone speculating about why William would leave such a large sum of money to someone they viewed as a stranger. People assumed that Emily was just waiting for the payout so she could move on with her life. They didn't realize that the money was the last thing on her mind. She didn't care about the wealth. She just wanted her husband. But with the payout now being questioned by the family and the public, Emily knew she had to prepare for what was coming next. The insurance company would be involved, and the scrutiny would only increase. Emily had no idea what to expect, but she knew she had to face whatever came her way. She had to stay strong for herself and for the memory of William. Even in the midst of all the negativity, there was a part of Emily that remained hopeful. She was determined to prove that she wasn't the person everyone thought she was. She wasn't a gold digger. She was a woman who had lost her husband, and all she wanted was to honor his memory and move forward with her life. But the road ahead was filled with obstacles, and she had no idea just how much more complicated things were about to get. Her story was far from over. In fact, this was only the beginning of a much larger, more complex journey that would change everything for Emily. The truth was about to come to light, and the real story behind her relationship with William was waiting to be revealed. But, for now, all she could do was try to survive the storm that was swirling around her and find a way to heal from the loss of the person she had loved most in the world. The days following William's funeral were a blur for Emily. Her grief felt endless, and yet the world outside seemed to have no time for her to mourn. While she was struggling with the loss of her husband, she was forced to face the judgment of people who barely knew her. Everywhere she went, the whispers followed her. The stares were unyielding, and the headlines painted her as something she wasn't. It was a nightmare. The town had turned into a place that felt foreign and hostile. Emily had always been known as a quiet, private person, someone who valued her own space. She wasn't the type to draw attention to herself, yet now she couldn't escape it. It seemed as though everyone had an opinion on her marriage, her motives, and her role in William's life. The people who had once greeted her with polite smiles now crossed the street to avoid walking past her. She had never been part of the town's gossip circles, and now she was at the center of it. At the local cafe, Emily overheard a group of women whispering as she walked past their table. She could hear their hushed voices, and though she tried to ignore them, the words cut through her like daggers. "She must have been after the money all along," one of them said. "No way someone that young would marry a man like him unless she was after something." Emily's heart sank every time she heard these kinds of remarks. She tried not to let it get to her, but it was impossible. Every glance, every comment, every assumption felt like another weight on her shoulders. She couldn't even walk into a store without feeling like everyone was watching her, wondering if she was going to run off with her husband's fortune. It was draining, and worse still, she couldn't talk about it with anyone. Her closest friends had either distanced themselves or sided with the family, unsure of what to believe. Meanwhile, William's relatives were anything but kind. They seemed to take pleasure in undermining her at every turn. They sent her long, cold emails questioning her every decision. Some of them even showed up at her house unannounced, making sure she knew that they didn't think she was capable of handling the wealth William had left behind. They were not subtle in their accusations, and their presence felt like an ongoing attack. Emily would open the door to find William's cousins or uncles standing there, armed with criticisms and demands. It felt like they were waiting for her to slip up, to make a mistake that would prove them right. They wanted her to fail. At the same time, Emily was trying to deal with the overwhelming responsibilities that came with being the new head of the family estate. She had to manage the properties, the finances, and of course the life insurance policy that had now become a point of contention. She wasn't someone who was used to this kind of pressure. But William had trusted her, and she had to do what he had asked of her. No matter how hard it got, Emily knew she had to stay strong. The life insurance payout was the subject of much debate. It was a significant amount of money, millions of dollars, and some members of William's family believed they were entitled to a piece of it. They questioned why William would leave everything to Emily, accusing her of manipulating him in his final days. But Emily knew this wasn't the case. She had never asked for the money. William had made his decisions long before his passing, and she was simply the person he had trusted to carry out his wishes. The worst part of it all was that Emily had to put on a brave face every time she interacted with William's family, or the media. She had to pretend that she wasn't deeply hurt by their accusations. She had to act like she wasn't crushed by the fact that people she once considered friends and family were now looking at her with distrust. There were moments when she felt utterly alone. But even in those moments, Emily didn't allow herself to break down in front of anyone. She couldn't afford to. She had to show the world that she was strong and capable. As the days turned into weeks, Emily found herself retreating into her own thoughts more and more. She started to spend long hours in the house, going over financial documents, making decisions she never imagined she would have to make. But the estate wasn't just about managing money. It was about managing the memories of the life she had shared with William. There were so many moments she didn't want to forget, so many small details that mattered. She would find herself walking through the rooms of the house, touching the things that had once been a part of their everyday lives. It was comforting, but also heartbreaking. One of the hardest parts of all was dealing with the media. It seemed like the moment one issue settled, another would take its place. Reporters were constantly calling, sending messages, and showing up at her doorstep. They were relentless, hoping to get a scoop, to twist the story in a way that would make for better headlines. They weren't interested in the truth. They were only interested in sensationalizing her story, making her look like the villain in a drama she never asked to be a part of. It was a Friday afternoon when a reporter knocked on her door for the first time. Emily had been sitting in her living room going through some old photos of William when the doorbell rang. When she opened the door, there stood a man with a camera, a notebook in hand. "Ms. Davis," he began, "I'm with the local news. We've been following your story, and I was hoping for a brief interview. Just a few questions about your husband's estate and the life insurance policy. We're all wondering how you're coping with everything." Emily's heart sank. She wasn't prepared for this. She hadn't asked for this, but she forced a smile and politely told the reporter that she wasn't ready to speak. He pushed a little harder, asking if she had anything to say about the rumors surrounding her. Emily, feeling a wave of frustration, closed the door gently. She couldn't deal with it. Not today. Later that evening, Emily sat in the kitchen, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea. She stared out the window, her mind racing. The life insurance policy had always been a private matter, but now it was out in the open, and people were making assumptions about her character based on it. She wasn't sure how long she could keep up the act. She wasn't sure how much longer she could pretend that everything was okay when her heart was breaking. But despite the exhaustion and the weight of it all, Emily knew one thing for certain: she couldn't give up. She couldn't let the people who didn't know her, who didn't understand her, dictate her future. She had to keep going. For William, for herself, and for the future she wanted to create. It wasn't going to be easy. She knew that. The road ahead was filled with obstacles. But Emily was determined to fight through it all. She had loved William with all her heart, and she knew that he had trusted her. Now, it was time for her to show the world that she was worthy of that trust. Emily felt as though the pressure had reached its peak. Every corner of her life seemed to be under constant scrutiny. The town, once familiar and welcoming, now felt like a cold, indifferent place. Her grief was still fresh, but it was now mixed, with frustration, confusion, and a growing sense of being misunderstood. Her husband, William, had been a part of her life for 5 wonderful years, and his sudden death had left a hole in her heart that nothing could fill. Yet instead of mourning in peace, she was caught in a storm of rumors and accusations that felt suffocating. But just when Emily thought things couldn't get any worse, a small glimmer of hope appeared. It came in the form of a phone call from her lawyer, Greg Lawson. He had been handling William's legal affairs for years, and Emily trusted him completely. She never expected him to be the bearer of good news, but that's exactly what happened when he told her that the insurance company had started to investigate the details of William's life insurance policy. At first, Emily wasn't sure what this meant. She had always believed that the policy was straightforward. She was the sole beneficiary, and that was that. But Greg explained that there had been some unexpected complications. The insurance company had discovered something they hadn't anticipated. William had made some last-minute changes to the policy. The most surprising change was the alteration of the beneficiary. The person who had originally been named as the beneficiary was not Emily, but someone else entirely, William's estranged brother, David. The revelation hit Emily like a bolt of lightning. She sat there in stunned silence, processing the news. David, her late husband's brother, the same man who had been out of their lives for years, the one who had caused so much trouble in the past, it didn't make sense. Why had William chosen to make such a significant change at the last minute? Greg went on to explain that William had recently changed the beneficiary to Emily, but the insurance company was now reviewing the circumstances surrounding the change. There were questions about whether or not the change was legitimate. Emily was puzzled and overwhelmed. What did this mean for her? Would she still be able to claim the insurance money, or would she have to fight for it? Emily felt as though the world was spinning. For weeks she had been living in a fog, dealing with the public's judgment and the strain of managing William's estate. She had tried to keep everything together, but now she realized that the situation was far more complicated than she had ever imagined. She was no longer just fighting the accusations from William's family and the media. She was now facing a legal battle that could tear everything apart. The revelation about David was the first piece of the puzzle, but Emily still didn't have all the answers. She knew that William had cut ties with his brother years ago. David had been involved in several shady business deals, and his behavior had caused a rift in the family. William had made it clear to Emily that he no longer wanted anything to do with his brother. But now, with the insurance policy at the center of the controversy, Emily couldn't help but wonder if there was more to the story than she had been told. Over the next few days, Emily spent hours talking with Greg and reviewing the legal documents. She learned that William had made the beneficiary change just a few weeks before his death. It was clear that William had wanted to protect her, but the timing of the change made things complicated. The insurance company was now questioning whether William had been coerced into making the change, or whether there had been some sort of fraud involved. Emily didn't understand how any of this was even possible. She knew William had been in good health when the change was made. He had seemed perfectly fine in the weeks leading up to his death. So why were they even asking these questions? Despite the confusion, Emily knew one thing for certain. William had loved her, and he had made his decision based on that love. She had never once asked him for money or anything material, and she certainly wasn't going to start now. But she had to protect his wishes. The idea that his family might try to take everything from her, despite his intentions, felt like a betrayal. In the midst of all this, Emily took some time to reflect on her life with William. She remembered the long conversations they'd had about their future. They had talked about their dreams, their fears, and the things they wanted to accomplish together. William had always told her that he trusted her completely, that he knew she would be able to handle whatever came their way. He had believed in her, and that belief had given her the strength to keep going. As Emily continued to process everything, she realized that the true challenge was not just the insurance policy. It was the battle for her reputation. The world had already painted her as a gold digger, someone who had married William for his wealth. She had spent weeks trying to prove that she wasn't that person. But now, with the insurance company's investigation in full swing, it seemed as though the world would only see her through that lens. No matter how much she tried to explain herself, the accusations continued to follow her like a shadow. Emily had to make a decision. She could either back down and let the accusations continue to build, or she could stand her ground and fight for the truth. She wasn't the kind of person to give up easily. She had fought hard to build her own career, and she had worked tirelessly to earn the respect of others. She wasn't going to let anyone take that away from her now. In the days that followed, Emily met with Greg and her legal team to prepare for the next steps. They began gathering evidence to support her case, including witness statements from people who knew William well. Emily knew that she would have to prove not only that she was the rightful beneficiary, but also that she had never once manipulated William into making the change. She wasn't sure how long the process would take, but she was determined to fight for what was right. As the investigation into the insurance policy continued, Emily found herself constantly on edge. The media buzzed with stories about the case, and her name was dragged through the dirt once again. Every time she turned on the television or opened a newspaper, there was another headline about her, about the estate, about the family drama. It felt like she couldn't escape it. But despite the pressure, Emily began to feel a sense of relief. For the first time since William's death, she felt like she was starting to take control of her own story. She wasn't going to let the world define her anymore. She would fight for her husband's memory, for her own peace of mind, and for the future she had dreamed of. The legal process was long and tiring, but Emily knew she had to stay strong. She wasn't alone in this fight. She had Greg, her lawyer, and a few trusted friends who stood by her. They believed in her, and that belief gave her the courage to keep going. She was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, knowing that the truth would eventually come out. As the investigation into the life insurance policy progressed, Emily felt a growing sense of confidence. She knew that no matter how hard things got, she would never give up. She owed it to William, to herself, and to the future they had once dreamed of together. As the weeks went by, Emily felt like she was living in a constant state of uncertainty. The legal battle over the insurance policy was taking longer than she had anticipated, and the pressure was mounting. It felt as though everything she had once known was slipping away. The media continued to sensationalize her story, making her feel like a character in a drama she didn't choose to be a part of. The whispers, the accusations, and the public scrutiny had all taken a toll on her. But through it all, one thing kept her going: the truth. One morning, Emily received a call that would change everything. It was from Greg, her lawyer. He told her that the investigation had uncovered something unexpected. It wasn't just about the beneficiary change anymore. As the insurance company dug deeper into William's life and financial records, they discovered something far more shocking than anyone could have imagined. David, William's estranged brother, had been involved in several illegal activities that could jeopardize the estate. These activities ranged from fraud to shady business dealings that had been hidden from the rest of the family. William had cut ties with David years ago because he had learned about his brother's involvement in these schemes. He had even gone so far as to remove David from his will, and the life insurance policy change had been part of his attempt to protect his wealth from falling into the wrong hands. The discovery hit Emily hard. She had always known that David was trouble, but she had no idea the extent of his actions. Now it seemed that everything William had done was to ensure that his money and assets would go to those he truly trusted, those who had been by his side through thick and thin. And at the heart of that trust was Emily. The revelation was a relief, but it also opened up a whole new set of questions. What would happen to the estate now? Would the family try to challenge William's wishes, or would they accept the truth? Greg explained that the insurance company had a clear understanding of William's intentions now. They had uncovered documents and evidence that showed that William had been deeply concerned about David's behavior. He had made the decision to change the beneficiary not only to protect his wealth, but also to shield Emily from any potential legal battles David might try to start. William had wanted to make sure Emily was taken care of, and now it was clear that his final wishes had been made with her in mind. For Emily, this was the first piece of real peace she had found since William's passing. It was as though a weight had been lifted off her shoulders. She could finally see the path forward, but she knew that there would still be battles ahead. The truth was on her side, but there were still challenges to face. The family would not give up easily, and David, even if he had been exposed, was not someone who would back down without a fight. Emily realized that the next step in the journey was to take control of the narrative. She had been silent for so long, letting the rumors and the public's assumptions shape the way people saw her. But now she had the truth on her side, and she wasn't going to let it go to waste. She began preparing for a public statement, one that would explain everything: William's decision, the evidence of David's actions, and her own role in all of it. Greg advised her to be careful about how much she revealed, but Emily felt that it was time for the world to hear her side of the story. She couldn't keep hiding in the shadows any longer. She had nothing to be ashamed of. William had trusted her, and she had always honored that trust. Now, she was ready to stand tall and show the world who she really was. She wasn't a gold digger. She was a woman who had loved her husband deeply and had been left to navigate a complicated, painful situation after his death. The media attention, while overwhelming, was now something Emily could handle. She knew that once she made her statement, the public's perception of her would begin to change. She would no longer be the villain in this story. She would be seen for what she truly was: a grieving widow, trying to honor the memory of her late husband while being caught up in a legal and family drama she never asked for. When the day came for Emily to address the press, she stood tall and confident in front of a room full of reporters. She had rehearsed her words countless times, and now she was ready to speak the truth. She began by describing her relationship with William, how they had met and fallen in love, and how they had built a life together. She spoke about his generosity, his kindness, and his loyalty. She made it clear that their marriage had been based on love, not money. As she continued, she explained the details of the insurance policy and the recent findings about David's illegal activities. She shared how William had made the decision to change the beneficiary to protect her and ensure that his wealth wouldn't fall into the wrong hands. Emily knew that some people would still question her motives, but she hoped that by being open and honest, she could finally put an end to the rumors. The reporters were silent as she spoke. There was no interruption, no aggressive questioning. Emily could see that the tone had shifted. People were listening, and they were beginning to understand. This wasn't just a story about a woman who had married for money. It was a story about betrayal, deception, and the fight for justice. And Emily was at the center of it, not as a villain, but as someone who had been caught in a web of lies and was finally revealing the truth. After the press conference, Emily felt a sense of relief. She had done it. She had taken back control of her narrative. It wasn't over yet, but she had made a bold statement. And for the first time in months, she felt like she could breathe again. The weight of the world didn't feel as heavy on her shoulders. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was fighting back. In the days that followed, the media's focus shifted. The story was no longer just about her and her marriage to William. It was about the truth behind his death, the family betrayal, and the fight for justice. Emily's reputation began to recover, and even some of William's relatives who had once questioned her motives started to come around. They saw the evidence, and they realized that Emily had always been sincere in her love for William. But the real victory came when the insurance company officially declared Emily the rightful beneficiary of William's policy. They acknowledged the findings of the investigation and confirmed that the change of beneficiary was made under legitimate circumstances. The battle was over. Emily had won, not just in the eyes of the law, but in the eyes of those who had doubted her from the very beginning. Though the road to this point had been long and difficult, Emily knew that this was just the beginning of her journey. She had lost William, and nothing could ever replace him. But she had also gained something invaluable, a sense of peace and the knowledge that she had fought for what was right. She could now look forward to the future with a renewed sense of purpose, ready to move forward with her life. The legal battles were finally behind Emily, but it felt like she was just beginning to process everything that had happened over the last few months. After the insurance company's official declaration that she was the rightful beneficiary, there was a sense of closure, but it was a quiet one. William's family had backed off, the rumors had started to die down, and Emily was slowly beginning to rebuild her life, piece by piece. But while she had won the legal battle, the emotional one was still ongoing. The grief she had pushed to the back of her mind now came rushing back with an intensity that she wasn't ready for. She missed William every day. He had been her partner, her confidant, her love, and even though she was relieved to have the truth come out, there was a deep sadness in her heart that she couldn't shake. Emily spent long nights sitting by the window staring at the stars. She often thought about the life she had imagined with William, dreams of traveling together, building a future, and growing old side by side. That future had been ripped away in an instant, and even though she was finally free from the accusations and legal entanglements, it didn't fill the hole in her heart. What she longed for most was simply for things to go back to the way they were before everything had turned upside down. But life doesn't work that way, Emily reminded herself. She couldn't go back, but she could move forward. Slowly, she began to see that this wasn't just a story of betrayal and loss. It was a story of resilience, a story of how someone could endure unimaginable challenges and come out stronger on the other side. She had faced accusations, legal battles, and public scrutiny, and yet here she was, still standing. She had survived it all, and now it was time to honor William's memory by making the most of what he had left behind for her. A future. Her first step was to start taking care of herself again. The stress had worn her down, and she had neglected her own well-being. In the midst of everything, Emily started working out again, taking walks in the park, and reading the books she had put off for months. She rediscovered the simple joys in life, things that had been overshadowed by the storm of accusations. She spent weekends hiking through the hills, finding peace in the quiet of nature, allowing herself the space to heal. It wasn't easy. Grief isn't something you can just move past. It's something that you have to learn to live with. But Emily was starting to see that the road to healing didn't have to be rushed. It was okay to take things one step at a time. It was okay to feel sad sometimes. What mattered was that she was moving forward, even if it was slowly. As the weeks turned into months, Emily also began to think about how she wanted to honor William's legacy. She knew that the wealth she had inherited wasn't just for her. William had worked hard for everything he had, and he had always been generous with his resources. Emily remembered the countless times he had donated to charity, supported causes he believed in, and used his wealth to help others. She knew that he would want her to do the same. And so, she decided to give back. Emily began researching different charities and foundations, looking for causes that spoke to her heart. She found several organizations that supported education, healthcare, and the arts, areas William had always cared deeply about. With his estate now legally and financially settled, Emily started making regular donations, contributing to causes that could make a real difference in people's lives. It felt good to know that the money would be put to good use, and it gave her a sense of purpose as she navigated this new chapter of her life. It wasn't just about charity, though. Emily also wanted to find a way to share her story. She knew that people often misunderstood her situation, but she had learned something powerful through everything she had experienced: the importance of owning your truth. She realized that by sharing her experiences, she could help others who were going through similar struggles. She wasn't the only one who had faced judgment, loss, and public scrutiny. There were so many people out there who had dealt with adversity and came out stronger on the other side. With that in mind, Emily decided to write a book, a memoir, not just about the legal battle and the media frenzy, but about the personal journey she had gone through. She wanted to talk about love, grief, resilience, and the lessons she had learned through the hardest times of her life. She knew that sharing her truth might help others find strength in their own lives. The book was a therapeutic process for Emily. It allowed her to reflect on the past, confront her feelings, and articulate the emotions she had struggled to express for so long. She wrote late into the night, pouring her heart onto the pages. It wasn't easy, but it was healing. And as she wrote, she began to feel the weight of the past slowly lift off her shoulders. As the book took shape, Emily started to think about the future in a different light. She was no longer just a widow battling accusations and legal complications. She was a woman with a voice, a story to tell, and a purpose. She wasn't just surviving, she was thriving in a way she never expected. Emily was discovering her strength, her resilience, and her ability to make a difference in the world. But it wasn't all about work and giving back. Emily had begun to open her heart to the possibility of new relationships as well. She wasn't rushing into anything, but she realized that she couldn't close herself off forever. Life had its ups and downs, but there was still beauty to be found. As time passed, Emily met new people, some who were kindred spirits, others who were just passing through. She wasn't ready to date seriously, but she enjoyed the friendships that blossomed in her life. She realized that it wasn't about replacing what she had lost with William. It was about opening her heart to new experiences and connections. One evening, as Emily sat by the fireplace reflecting on everything she had been through, she felt a quiet sense of peace settle over her. The fight for William's estate was behind her. The world had finally seen her for who she truly was. And though she would always miss William, she knew that his love and his trust in her had been the greatest gifts he could have given her. Emily was ready for whatever came next. She had faced the hardest of battles and had emerged stronger, wiser, and more determined to live her life fully. She wasn't the same person she had been when William was alive, but she wasn't anyone else either. She was Emily Davis, a woman who had loved, lost, and fought for what was right, and she was ready to embrace the future with open arms.